My name's James Lavelle and I run a record label in the UK called Mowax Recordings, and that's kind of what I do. The idea behind Mowax is to put out as many different styles of music, so you'd have experimental hip-hop, which we're very much categorised at the moment. We kind of formed a kind of music which a lot of people call trip-hop over here. Cultural and worldly, it wasn't kind of meant to be just an English label. It's artists from all over the world, from France, Japan, America and the UK. We're also very much kind of, I like to feel very design-led, and we work with various kind of old and new school artists, from the likes of Giovanni from Supreme to Futura 2000 from Graffiti. I feel it's important to support all the different aspects that come out of music. When I got into music, it was a very cultural thing, because hip-hop at that time was breakdancing, it was graffiti, it was the way you looked, it was the way you spoke, and it's kind of important in a label to kind of bring that back out, because as music has become so much more commercialised, it's important to put a focus onto all the different aspects that come through it, and I think that's the importance of Mowax.
My name's Gilles Peterson and I do a little bit of everything. My day job is running Talkin Loud, but I do a lot of radio and still do a lot of spinning and a bit of production. When I first got into the sort of music business when I was about 17, 18, on the record company side of things, I'd been DJing from the age of 15, having set up my own pirate radio station and just doing a little bit of, you know, playing different music really for people, and it went down really well, and I sort of became known as someone who was a bit sort of on the jazz side of things. The scene was really building up nicely at this point, and youth culture and the club culture movement was, you know, becoming quite mainstream, and the acid jazz scene was beginning to come out of this, and that's really when I set up a label called Acid Jazz with a guy called Eddie Pillar, who now runs the label on his own. I was doing a radio show at the time for the BBC on Radio London, and he used to come along and try and get me to play these records by the James Taylor Quartet, which were okay, but I actually preferred him as a person and the records as records, and I thought, yeah, this guy's kind of got, you know, a bit of a vibe, and he knows how to kind of make my ideas work in a way. And there wasn't really an outlet with the major record labels to sign these bands up to. It was still too early, so I hooked up with Eddie and we set up Acid Jazz. Talkin Loud comes from a club that I used to DJ at and run on a Sunday afternoon at a place called Dingwalls, which unfortunately has been knocked down now. But we used to do a session every Sunday afternoon, and, you know, everyone used to go. It was a real mad mix of people. The music was, you know, from Coltrane to Public Enemy. You know, it was really what I'd always dreamed of, you know, joining the dots, really, just connecting things, you know, not alienating jazz and making it some sort of little thing for a certain type of person who had a goatee beard. Well, this label was launched around 1988, 89, and my first signing was Galliano, and then the Young Disciples, and then Incognito, and then Omar. The Young Disciples, you know, they made a record that was almost too good, really, you know, because it was never really thought of at the time, when the whole idea of it to be this long-term sort of, we are a band and we want to tour and we want to be rich and successful, and that was never their philosophy. It was just sort of, you know, a group of people who had some great conceptual ideas about music. It was just a moment, and it was a classic record, and that's where it's going to stay. And I think they've all gone off and done their own things, and I don't think you could kind of recreate the Young Disciples now with those individuals, because they've all gone off in their own little kind of their own roads to freedom.
My name is Eddie Pillar, and I run the independent label called Acid Jazz. When I left school, I started DJing and promoting bands and gigging and managing. And then the obvious extension to that is just to start putting out my own records. Basically, I've always been involved in music that nobody else likes. What inspired the Small Faces, Otis Redding, Curtis Mayfield, Marvin Gaye, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Cypress Hill even, you know, you name it, they've inspired me. I like black music, and that doesn't necessarily mean black music, I don't know, the American kind of terms confuse me greatly. I mean, I like black inspired music and black influenced music, that's where I'm coming from. Acid House came along in '86 and just went boom, massive. And we found that kind of Acid House ignored the kind of traditional music that we're into, like soul, jazz and funk. And we thought, well, if we give soul, jazz and funk a new name, then maybe people will take it as seriously as they take Acid House. So we did, and they did, and it was very funny. Acid jazz has been going quite a while now, and the genre of acid jazz is now so meaningless. It's always been meaningless. It's always a term that's been used by journalists and other people. All it's been to us is a record label, and because they didn't have any way of describing this kind of music, you know, people called it acid jazz for many years, and kind of now they don't really anymore, which is good because it allows us to get back to the business of being a record label. Giles was my partner once. We both set up the company for about, I don't know, about 9 months we were working together, and that was 8 years ago. So quite a lot's happened since then. He left for Talkin Loud, and were part of Polygram, which he set up with Polygram, and I stayed independent. I think the funny thing about acid jazz is people see my label differently from the way I see it myself. If you ask people about acid jazz, they'll go retro. That's the most obvious comment. Now, why is that? Is that because we play instruments and don't use computers? Or is it because the instruments we play, we record them in a way that people haven't really recorded them since the late 70s? I don't know. Is that why we're retro? Is performing as a band using real instruments retro? I don't know. But even if it is, you know, we've been breaking down musical barriers for a long time now. We don't just make corduroy records, do you know what I mean? We've got African Head Charge, Gregory Isaacs, Athletico. You know, we make any kind of music as long as we like it, and that's the buzz about being an independent. You don't really have to, you know, do anything you don't want to do. I don't know, really. We're just going to keep pushing back the musical barriers, mixing funk, soul, hip-hop, trip-hop, flip-flop, jungle, bungle, zippy. George, you won't know that because that's an English joke, but still, you know, who knows? We just keep making great records until one day Curtis Mayfield comes and says, can I make a record on acid jazz? And then I'll be very, very happy indeed.
I'm James Lavelle, and I run MoWax. Drum and bass, to techno, to hip-hop, to alternative. That is what we're into, and that is what MoWax represents, and hopefully it represents some of the best of that kind of music. I started the label because I wanted something to fit in between two labels which were kind of ruling the scene at the time, which was Talkin Loud, which was the more commercial side of the music, and Acid Jazz, which is the more underground side of the music. I wanted something to be younger and more street orientated. I come from a background of dance music and hip-hop predominantly, and I wanted something that fitted in more to that scene but still embrace what was going on in London at the time. The first year of MoWax was kind of orientated to trying to accommodate the scene of which you were part of. So the label changed when I put a record out by a guy called DJ Shadow, which is an instrumental hip-hop record. Kind of in the way that techno and house has always been predominantly instrumental and has taken you on a journey. I felt that there was room for that in hip-hop. I put this record out and kind of went off on a limb with it because everybody was kind of like, nah, you know, this isn't, you know, this isn't right, this isn't, you know, this kind of record is just not going to do anything. And that really changed things because instead of wanting to aspire to other people, we created something new, and that was one of the main turning points of MoWax. The main music that I always was into was hip-hop, and hip-hop started as being very diverse. If you listen to a record by Africa Bombard like Death Mix, it incorporates Gary Newman to James Brown, and I think a lot of the best artists in the world are people that embrace different forms of music, and that's important to me. The most important thing with MoWax is it kind of is important to me that it's a kind of cultural thing in the same way that hip-hop was in the 80s when it started. It was about the way you dressed, the music you listened to, the way you danced, the trainers on your feet, the way you row, everything, to the way skateboarding is like that, and those scenes are things that I've always been heavily into, and I hope MoWax represents that. I think that's why it's quite diverse and quite all over the place in this musical direction, because the skate scene and the hip-hop scene was like that when I was really into it. The track that's on the CD-ROM, which is a kind of outtake from an UNKLE session, was done with a classic New York 80s rapper and graffiti writer called RMLZ. It basically is one of the classic kind of undiscovered hip-hop records of the 80s, lending, it basically influenced a lot of big rappers of the moment, like Be Real from Cypress Hill, heavily sampled, RMLZ was heavily sampled by people like the Beastie Boys. We managed to track him down. He recorded some vocals, and the track's called Rock On, and basically represents a lyric from his first record, which was Beatbop, which was one of the classic lines was Rock On from that record. It was kind of what you always remember from that record, and we did this track with him. And it's a track that is coming out in a different form on the UNKLE album.
Rock on.